Good afternoon. Can I have a hello back? Oh, we're still awake. Excellent. Are you looking forward to the question time? Yes. Have you had a fab time at Progress today? Yes. Excellent, excellent. Well, I'm Aisha Hazarika. I used to be a Labour Party special advisor, and then I became a stand-up comedian. Insert your own punchline as appropriate. And I'm really delighted to Progress to be back here chairing this question time. It's always a highlight in the conference. And I just want to say a big, big thank you to Progress. Can we have a big round of applause for the team at Progress? Because they really have done. I think they've done an absolutely amazing job, and I think we can all be honest. Look, we are in difficult times, and understatement of the century. And you know, I think their kind of resilience, and I think the fact that they are sort of rebooting the whole thing and trying to sort of modernise and freshen up the vision is absolutely brilliant. That's exactly what is needed right now. This kind of new energy and this new impetus. And also, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming here today as well, because as I said, you know, these are difficult times. We're, you know, in this huge sort of political and kind of constitutional crisis at the moment, and it is a tough time for moderates within the party. But Progress can't survive without your support, and just turning up today really means something. And I think we all have to kind of stick together. So big round of applause for yourselves. Right, we have got a cracking panel joining us today. We have the wonderful Angela Eagle, who is the MP for Wallasey, and she's just brilliant. Legend. And we have brilliant Stella Creasy, who has asked me to remind everybody that she is the world's expert on double denim. So if anyone has some pressing, she'll have a denim surgery afterwards.
Just wrong.
I thought it's just one. You can never double down on that. It's like, okay, she'll hold a wee surgery about that kind of after.
Just wrong.
That. So delighted to be joined by Rosina Chowdhury. Big round of applause for Rosina, who has been a councillor in Lambeth since 2014 and currently serves as the Chief Whip. We're delighted to have you. And finally, big round of applause, warm welcome to Kate Proctor from the Evening Standard. Kate is part of the political team at the Evening Standard and is always kind of like sniffing around Westminster, catching all the sort of gossip, and it often pops up on radio and television. Kate and I were on the green quite a lot over the last couple of months getting trench foot as we worked out whether we were ever going to get any result on Brexit. And guess what? Nothing happened. Right, we're going to crack on. Want to hear from lots of different people. As usual, the Progress rules are we would like to start with a woman. And I'm going to open the floor to questions. The other thing, just as a bit of housekeeping, we're not doing sort of specific questions to specific people. It is a bit like question time. I am Fiona Bruce. I'm going to try and raise my eyebrow as much as I can just to get the actual... Actually, if this was properly question time, we would have a seat for Nigel Farage, so it's... We decided not to follow the rules entirely. So, any takers for my first question? And I am looking for a woman. Lady at the back.
Ladies. Yeah.
If you could stand up, the mic's coming to you.
Over there. Who am I going to?
Oh, yep.
There are two ladies at the back.
Oh, right. We can. Oh, we can go crazy. We can
have two women.
We can have.
Are we allowed that?
I know. Don't tell the leadership.
No, won't.
That was bad. That was my bad. But not.
What happens at Progress stays at Progress.
Okay, exactly.
So you're absolutely right. Things are
you
a
just
bit.
Say who you are.
Sorry, my name's Christabel. I'm a councillor in Hammersmith and Fulham, and a member of the Progress Strategy Board as well. So, but my question is, you're right. Things are a bit dire at the moment, but it's struck me that sometimes being the underdog can generate an energy, a sense of insurgency, and I think for a while, for example, the Remain movement in Brexit captured that. How do we capture that energy? How do we capture that insurgency? Something that Jess, Phillips was talking about, sort of not being frightened, not sort of, focus grouping everything. That's the kind of energy that actually Jeremy Corbyn had at one point and used it to his advantage. How can we capture that same energy?
Brilliant. That's a great first question to kick us off with. And Angela, I'm going to come to you first on that. How do we capture the energy?
Well, you don't set out saying we have to capture the energy, so we'll have to have a focus group to see what it is. Why are we in politics? To change the world for the better, for the people that we came in to represent. What are our values? Equal access to opportunities, making sure that people, wherever they come from, wherever they live, have the best start and chances in life, ensuring that nobody is treated badly, having an empowering state which can enable us to get through those changing economic times that we're on the edge of, ensuring equality and equal access to all opportunities regardless of your colour, your religion, your sex, gender, disability, and all the rest of everything, LGBT. And so what you have to do is say, okay, what are the problems that face our society now? What are the challenges that, using our labour values, we can overcome? And then you have to be plugged in to what you think we need to do. And then the zeitgeist, I think, will be with you. Now is the time, actually, for democratic socialist advance. Our economy and our system is running into the sand. It's created a hugely unequal society. We've got the challenge of climate change, which can only be overcome by global agreements and planning, all of which are part of our values. And so actually, if we were articulating our values and our purpose in politics, the zeitgeist would be with us, and it's that we've got to do. And you're all very enthusiastic about it, I can tell.
But do you agree with that, Sarah? Do you think it's just enough to sort of be voicing our principles and our very good sort of hopes, which, you know, we all try and do, but something didn't obviously work with that, or it hasn't been working?
So I think there's three things to bear in mind. First and foremost, never forget that politics always makes a difference. And I know that seems quite hard at the moment to argue, but I was thinking, because this week was 9 years since my cohort in Parliament got elected. And if you remember back in 2010, we had a government that had committed us to eradicating child poverty by 2020. So in a year's time, if we had kept Labour in office, then I think there's a pretty good chance we would have hit or been very close to that target. There are now 4 million kids in poverty in this country. It is actually higher levels of poverty than the mid-1990s. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because you get Tory and coalition governments that make choices like universal credit and freezing child benefit and deciding to cut corporation tax rather than investing in youth services. And I know it's very hard right now, but the first thing I would say to do is to remember that never forget this always makes a difference, because there are bad choices to make as much as good choices. But the second thing, and this is where I agree with Angela, is that you have to have the choices that you want to make to know why you're not just in opposition, why you don't just say child poverty is bad, but actually we can be the movement that eradicates it because we know what we want to do. It's the difference between being bystanders and being change makers. And one of my frustrations, if I'm honest, because we're all amongst friends, with some of the organisations that are part of our Labour movement right now, mentioning no names, Momentum, is that in 3 years, it's become about being a bystander. It's become about being a cheerleader. It's not become about being a change maker. I can't name a single issue on which they've made weather, a single cause, a single campaign. Politics only makes a difference. You're right, the insurgency movement only makes a difference when you have an answer to the challenges that we see in our society, and you are prepared to put your head above the parapet and fight for it, and set out that argument. And the final thing, the third thing that you've got to remember in all of this, is that leadership really matters. But when I talk about leadership, and yes, look, absolutely, we see it right now, because if you think about a country that's gone through 9 years' worth of austerity, why on earth would you add on top of that leaving the European Union and all the things that that will do to our economy and our communities that will make it harder to repair the damage that austerity's done? But it is not enough to look to other people to be the leaders for that change, to be the ones arguing for the kind of country and the kind of communities we want to be. It's not just about leadership at the top, it's about leadership throughout. And that is a challenge to each and every one of us in this room. It's not enough to think other people are doing bad things and somebody should do something about it. If you want to be the insurgents, be the insurgent yourself.
Rosina, I mean, what's your view from particularly from local government on this issue?
So just to be a bit contrary, I'd say sometimes there's a bit too much energy, and from certain sectors of our new membership, certainly in Lambeth, where we're constantly being told about street stalls and protests and petitions and marches, and after a while you start to think, well, actually, this. Is this what our electorate want? When I speak to my local residents, when I speak to Lambeth residents across the borough, actually people seem to be quite happy with what we're doing. They understand that we have to deal with a lot of cuts and we're having to make some tough choices. But actually, we sometimes find that our electorate are quite happy for us to carry on doing our work, and sometimes the energy of our new members, not all new members, but certain ones from 2015, are actually sometimes, just making it a lot harder than it needs to be. And when we say, when in branch meetings or GC, well, now we have AMMs in Streatham, but when we want to talk about things that matter to local residents, we're told that we should be focusing on more important things, like what's going on in South America, for example. So sometimes it would be good to just get those people to think about the important things in people's lives rather than using that energy in such a negative way.
Now, Kate, you're obviously not a sort of Labour person. You have a kind of an outsider's view. Why do you think we have not captured the spirit that Chris mentioned? But also, just because we've got quite a biased panel, obviously, and we are all in a room, we do need a bit of grit in the oyster, and we might need a few kind of hard truths said about ourselves. I mean, Stella sort of, said, heard about sort of momentum from Rosina and Stella, but I think I want you to be honest with us as well. Why is it that the people in this room and the people on this panel, including myself, why is it that the moderates have been absolutely hopeless as well? Because let's be honest, we haven't really won our cause twice now, and you're absolutely right about some of the energy is not best placed, but there is energy there. I want you to give us a very, very honest view, because you're a kind of top flight political journalist. You've got a bird's eye view of this. Where are the problems for the party, and where are the problems and challenges for us particularly? And do be honest with us.
Okay, so I don't think it's a values thing, and I think Stella was completely correct when she was saying, what change perhaps have Momentum actually made. And I can think of things that Stella's done in Parliament which has been very, very effective, and you haven't seen that from Momentum more widely. But when I go to, let's say, Momentum events, there is energy there, and it is because it's very young. And I know that you probably all might groan, but there's branding and there's wit. It's quite funny. They're quite lively and quite fun. And I know that social media accounts that are sort of run, you guys have the power to do it and do it really well, but not everyone does, and it can sometimes be a bit flat. But what I would say is it's nowhere near as bad as Change UK. And I just watched their launch video, and I'm just so shocked. I mean, all of that intellect and brain power, and they've come up with something as flat as that. It just astonishes me. There is no life or liveliness. There's no kind of looking towards younger people, younger voters, the next generation. And I know it's probably quite irritating if you think, I don't want to be dictated to by an 18-year-old who's just done a module at university about Cuba, but I feel like, you know, Change UK could maybe take a big leap out of that book. So keep it lively and keep it fresh and keep it youthful. And I think the branding for Progress Today has changed. That's really good to see. And I just think don't worry too much, because Change UK are kind of doing it a lot worse at the moment.
Well, no, because we're going to crack on. Right, and we had another question. There was another lady just behind the previous lady, and then we'll...
Thanks. I'm Sue. I'm from Ealing, Labour Party member. Question that I think you just addressed, actually, about what we can do, concrete and perhaps obvious steps to improve our brand recognition and have a simple, coherent message, or apparently simple, coherent message that appeals to voters, because at the end of the day, that's who we need to get on our side if we're going to be able to effect any change. We need to be elected and in power. I mean, leaving aside all the internal political shenanigans.
Okay, so because we slightly addressed that thing, that was a good point to make, but I'm going to crack on to the next question because I'm just conscious of time and I know there's tons. So when you're doing your questions, can you keep it quite focused to be an actual sort of question? And if we've just done the thing, think of another one or pass. Think on your feet. Right, gentleman over there in the sort of tartany checked shirt.
My name's Edward from Poplar and Limehouse. With the massive climate crisis that we have, I think Greta Thunberg and everything, I just wanted to get something from each of the panellists on what energy do you think that we can take from XR and the Extinction Rebellion movement, and maybe what are the learnings we can take from them to use in our own internal battles against maybe a hard left which doesn't actually have any ideas.
Okay, Rosina, do you want to start with that one?
Okay, well, thank you. I think what they did with their message and around conveying it, they made it very emotional and connected it to real things that people could understand, and it resonated with them. And I think when you do that, then your job is a lot easier. You're not having to constantly explain things to people. And yeah, so I think the communication side of it is really important. The giving people something to believe in, a reason to believe in, and making it easy to understand. And that's what was so beautiful about their whole strategy, was the fact that, you know, it didn't take much to get what they were about, whereas sometimes I feel that, you know, sometimes we have to explain a lot. So.
Angela, what lessons can we learn from the sort of from those climate change campaigners?
Well, compare them to the suffragettes. There's a simple moral issue that's easy to understand because we're so close. We're in the 6th great extinction that this planet is experiencing, and if we've got like a 10-year window now to do something about it, and if we don't drastically change and re-engineer the way we live, the way we generate energy, the way we travel around the world, we're already in serious doo-doo, but we might be in terminal doo-doo, which is obviously a technical term. It's
like it's an evergreen term at the moment.
Yeah. Although that is recyclable at least.
Exactly.
Anyway, the suffragettes similarly. So they had branding in terms of the suffragettes, a culture, songs, marches, all of that. The Extinction Rebellion people, the same thing. And sometimes there's just a time when people realise that they've got to change things. And they've been at this for a while, like the suffragettes were, in all sorts of ways. And they've escalated it to, right, we're blocking bridges, we're going to now disrupt things, because right is on our side and we've got the moral high ground. And I think that what happened with Greta, who is a communicator in many different ways, a 15-year-old girl, a representative of the future, someone that can focus because of her disability or different way of thinking, you might call it, whatever. She could focus relentlessly on it. And she was such an articulate message deliverer that people got it. Whether we can actually deliver the change that she's demanding in the time left is hard to say, but the simple moral message, the urgency, that is what's important about those things.
And what was so great about Greta Thunberg was that all the right people got upset by her.
They did. All the
Didn't
right
they?
people hated her.
And when I say right, I mean right wing, obviously. And what I loved about it was when Toby Young had a go at her for having privileged parents. That's Toby Young. That's Toby Young, all right, who didn't get into like Oxbridge and got his dad to make some phone calls. Stella.
So I'm going to look at this from maybe the other end of the telescope, because I think your question is about mass movements. And actually, yes, there are a lot of lessons from Extinction Rebellion. I've been working with them. They're quite difficult lessons, frankly, for this room of people. And I think we should be honest about it. Partly because their diagnosis is not actually about climate change. Their diagnosis is about the failure of politics to be able to actually act and what you can do about that. So one of the first things that I would say we need to learn from them is being able to understand genuinely how the world has changed. One of the problems in this movement, I'd say, I'm going to just go, I don't call myself, I'm not a moderate. I want radical change in this country because this country is radically changing. And it is not enough for me to think of a left-wing movement that just tries to steady the damage. I want the kids in Walthamstow to have amazing opportunities, but they are going to be very different opportunities to the ones that their parents had. You have to have an analysis of where the world is going, which is what XR have, and how you can then address that. And that answers Angela's question, because what they're calling for is a citizens' assembly, basically to bring the public into a political process they see as failing, to look at what you could do to reach those targets and actually treat the public, frankly, as grown-ups. We're really bad at doing that on the left. We are shockingly bad at seeing the public has ever anything else to contribute apart from a vote. And frankly, we're shockingly bad at doing it in the Labour movement too. We still see you. I spoke to somebody at the weekend trying to persuade them to join the Labour Party. The last time I did that, I joined, and overnight I woke up and there were 4,000 leaflets on my doorstep for a leaflet delivery. Right? You're all laughing because you all recognise it. But that's about control and about empowerment. And actually what XR has done so well, from me dealing with the organisation, it's sometimes a bit of a nightmare because there's like 5 different groups of people who all think they're involved in political renewal activity, but because they are leading it, because they're actually being treated as grown-ups who have a responsibility to make it work, there's many more people involved in it and much more activism. This movement needs to recognise it needs new ideas. You cannot go into another election just saying NHS, NHS, at people, especially when we're in a country full of millions of people living with preventable diseases. We can't go into the next election saying, don't worry, this is about electing Greg. I don't think we have to wait to get into office to have the power of ideas change things. I just think when you get into office, it makes it easier to make those things happen. But we act like it's just about 650 people in a place called Hogwarts Gone Wrong making decisions for people, and that's all you've got to do is vote for us and we'll do all the difficult thinking. None of the problems we're facing in the next 50 or 60 years in our lifetimes will be dealt with that. The changing world of work, climate change, yes, international terrorism and things like the refugee crisis, you cannot deal with them at a distance. And the left, actually more than the right, fails to bring the public with them. And what XR has done is recognise the nature of the problem, the role that people can play in it, and ask them to step up and do it. And that's why they've been effective.
And Kate, what's your dealings been with them, and what, do you think politicians can learn from them, or are they just too different an entity? Because I've done some stuff on CNN with the organisers, and what the difference is between, I suppose, us and them is, I was saying to them, well, what are your policy prescriptions? They said, we have none. We're trying to spark a conversation, and then we want the public to sort of come up with the solutions. But can politics do that?
Yeah, definitely. I think I was really, really impressed at what they were able to do. It pissed off so many people. It was like incredible just to watch. I was in the chamber when they superglued themselves to the windows, and I was just like, this is amazing. This is like really, really cool. But I was impressed at their organisation and their professionalism and what what it showed to me, to be honest, their professionalism in terms of organising a mass demonstration, irritating people and getting a message across. That's what I mean when I talk about professionalism. I think that just engage with them, and I'm just so amazed at how many politicians decided to slag them off openly on social media. I mean, they've got a point about climate change. It's really serious. It's really important. And they're also speaking to people that are still in secondary school. They're speaking to the people who are in primary school. They're speaking to a whole generation of potential voters. So it's a kind of curious thing if they're saying, you know, we don't exactly have the answers, but we want you to care. But I think that is a powerful message. And I think,
do you think politicians could get away with that?
No.
What, just
No.
engaging?
Yeah, just saying, like, you know, we want a nicer world, but we don't have any ideas. Or is that? I mean, that's basically.
No, of course not. No, of course not. No, I was saying that you need to engage in terms of getting them around the table as much as possible. You know, do more than just turn up and have a photograph like Michael Gove tried to do with Greta. And you just engage constantly and talk about these green ideas. I'm no expert at all on climate change or green policy making, but I would imagine that, of course, politics has a massive role to play. And I think if you've got Michael Gove, literally is the only person really in the Conservative Party who is spearheading that idea. And I've heard some quite frank conversations exactly about why the Conservatives are doing that. They're doing that to get younger voters. If you can do that with a bit of compassion and realism, and if you can do it from a benevolent point of view, not just because you're trying to get votes from younger people, then I think that's the answer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least Michael Gove turned up to meet her. Theresa May didn't turn up, and there was just an empty chair at the thing. But apparently the empty chair made a much better and more human contribution and was a much better dancer as well. And, of course, they do some quite, you know, mad tactics, like when they glued their bums to the screen at the House of Commons. And interesting, I think I think Peter Kyle was just on his feet at the time, and he just sort of uttered the words, "There are some massive cracks opening across Parliament." And of course, the best thing was Ed Miliband's face, which was just like, oh, just like behind
it's like
it.
Nobody knew where to look, and the prudish behaviour of everyone was just amazing to watch as everyone turned there.
It was great that the House of Commons press office issued like a sort of reassuring thing saying the first bum cheek was unglued 8 minutes after the incident. Like that was meant to give us some kind of massive reassurance that everything wasn't going tits up in Parliament
There
right
was
now.
actually a competition for puns that went on during the debate. Somebody was talking about the naked truth.
Yes.
And there were a whole range of things, because obviously the Speaker didn't want anyone to draw attention to the
massive,
butter
giant, naked arses that were like
that
on the
were
kind of thing,
above
yeah.
us.
Which obviously,
but they were doing it subtly with naked puns.
well, we won't be having any nakedness today. We can all get our attention other ways. Right, okay, next question. Gentleman over there. Yeah, can we get a microphone to the...
I'm Martin Phillips, New Forest West, but I knock on doors in Southampton. And talking about reconnecting with voters, I'm sure if I ask people in the room who knock on doors regularly, what's the number one issue that comes up when you knock on doorsteps? Potholes, things like that.
Dog.
If we're going to reconnect, if we need to listen to people and what they're concerned about, how is the Labour Party going to turn itself from a group that just want to change the world and talk about the top issues, the worldwide issues, into one that actually deals with issues like that? Because that's the one that comes up with most voters most of the time.
Okay, Stella, do you want to kick off with that?
Wouldn't it be better to... Isn't Rosina? Didn't she get...
No.
Didn't
No, Rosina answered the last question first.
Okay. Sorry. Well, also, having been a poach-turned-gamekeeper, now possibly pheasant, as having been a local councillor and indeed a chief whip, so I take my hat off to you. Absolutely, people start at the local and then they go. They don't do either or, so people will take in either or. I think actually what I hear most on the doorstep now is you're all useless, a lot of you. And I think one of the things that we have to be very aware of, as I say, is that politics does make a difference, but it's our people and people who believe in the power of collective action who are more likely to, at the moment, to walk away from voting at all. I'm very worried about turnout in the European elections in a couple of weeks' time, because that message that comes across on the doorstep is just, what is the point? Whether they feel that about litter collections, potholes, parking, housing, all the things that used to get, particularly at a local level, one of the things I think we have to show people is the power of change and how change is achieved. It is possible, it's just bloody hard work. And in that sense, having lost councillors 2 weeks ago, and I was up in Stoke, I met some amazing people who were standing for local government and who didn't get through. We've lost a real wealth of talent to show the power of politics and the difference that it makes. I mean, that's why as a party we have to look at why we lost those seats, why we didn't make the gains we thought we would make, and why it's not just about Brexit, it's also about people's sense of whether it's possible to make change. When independent parties are doing so well, that's telling us something about the status quo. And again, as a political movement that should be democratic as well as socialist, we should care about why people want to participate. I do think you can involve people in a bigger conversation as well, and this is where I lose everybody in the room, is that I don't think door knocking is how you do that. Because in general, turning up on a Sunday morning, I mean, who here's knocked on the door and found somebody naked? Yeah, right. So maybe not the Extinction Rebellion notwithstanding.
That might encourage more people to go door knocking. We need to get this out.
Trust me.
The people that I always
There's
get
a lot of desperate people out there, honestly.
It never works.
Where was this?
Where was
Yeah.
Do you want the address? Thinking about how we can have conversations with people online, offline, where they want to have a conversation about the thing that they frankly give a shit about, is where that's why, as a political movement, the fact that in 120 years we haven't changed the way we work, the fact that we ask you to go and sit in GCs and ECs and talk to each other for God knows how long about motions that go through motions and minutes, etc., when that time might be better spent, for example, in residents' associations, in tenants' groups, in local park groups, all those things where you can actually connect with people, is something I'm very alive to. One of my proudest achievements as the Walthamstow MP is that now we have 4 GCs a year. So if that's not a reason to move to Walthamstow, I don't know what is. Because it's about, because if you want to have those conversations and connect with people, you've got to spend time with them and not interrupt their Sundays when they've got other things to do, clothed or not.
And see them naked. Right. Rosina, what's your take on that? How do we merge the kind of local sort of small issues that do matter with people with this sort of bigger vision?
Can I just say 4 GCs a year?
Yeah.
That's amazing. I was so jealous. So yeah, we've got AMMs and I hate them. Anyway, never mind. So yes, connecting with local people. Now we do door knocking. It's, especially in a ward like Streatham Hill up until 2014. It was, in my ward I'm talking about, it was, solidly Lib Dem for like 30 years or so. So like we had to, there was a lot of work we needed to do, and we needed to make sure that the next connection was a Labour connection. So we were very active in speaking to people and letting people know how effective we were as a Labour council, and look at us, we're fixing the potholes and we're getting you your CPZ consultation. And actually sort of delivering on things that people were talking about, whether it's on the doorstep, but also increasingly on an app called Nextdoor, which we have been getting lots of people asking us direct questions, or having discussions which sometimes are based on rumours and conjecture, and we have to like sort of dive in and say, no, actually that's incorrect. This is when the next consultation's happening. So things like that, just keeping our sort of eyes and ears open for every possible opportunity to connect with the electorate. The members we will speak to anyway, because there's lots of opportunities to speak to members. But when it comes to our residents, our voters, our electorate, we really, the only way I think you get value out of any connection is a face-to-face one when you're talking.
And Rosina, so for you, do you still think door knocking is important? It is part of the...
Yeah, I do, because that's where you have the conversations. Because when you have them, sometimes when you have them online, they lack nuance. And for some...
I cannot believe that.
So, and because in my previous incarnation, before I became a councillor. I was a jobbing, a qualitative researcher where I went and around, did depth interviews and focus groups, and I was talking to people, trying to interpret their expressions, their body language, the things they were saying in between their sentences, trying to understand what it was that they really meant.
So it's still an important, that face-to-face.
Absolutely, yeah.
Angela, what's your take on this in terms of the...
Well, I think that politics over the years or electoral politics has turned into a kind of technocratic thing. The development of focus groups, the kind of retail offer, the idea that somehow it's like deciding on brands, which brand or which supermarket you're going to go to do your shopping. So you have to advertise and have a brand, and you have to have these basic sort of slogans that you just repeat, the soundbite culture. I mean, that really is about the way that politics has been done in advanced capitalist societies. And it's like it's a retail thing with branding attached. And that turns people who are voters in general into spectators who get to choose between A and B or red and blue. And if they don't like red, then they can march off to blue and, buy things in a different place. But actually, if you don't do politics, you get it done to you. And it's not the way that politics should work, proper democratic politics should work. You're not in the audience or in the crowd watching the football match. You're on the pitch. And far too few people think that they're on the pitch. And so they end up in the crowd going, oh, well, that's a crap game. Well, we never see you except at election times. And it becomes separate. So what we need to do is have an involving, empowering politics, which is much harder to bring about because you've got to be everywhere. You've got to have eyes and ears everywhere. You've got to have feelers out. You've got, and obviously as party memberships have shrunk as a percentage of the population, having that reach has been much harder. That's what Momentum did so well. It managed to connect with a load of people and have a more modern way of communicating with them with those snappy little videos, and then leading them off to places where they could be politically involved and shaped. And that is what the Labour Party needs to get back to.
But just to pick up on, for a lot of people though, in terms of what you and Stella and others have sort of said, for a lot of people who are really, really busy, just getting on with their everyday lives, everyone's having a pretty tough time at the moment, they maybe don't want to have that much engagement. They want good local politicians solving the potholes, making sure the bins are collected.
But hang on. The Labour Party was created when people were in factories, grinding away, having no time to do anything.
In terms of where people are now, I mean, something that I get a lot from people is, and I certainly get this a lot on my LBC phone-in show, when people just ring up and say, look, a lot of people, by the way, both on Leave and Remain, were like, I wish you'd never given us the referendum because we don't want to make these decisions. We want our politicians, local and national, to be competent and just to sort of get on with it and just deliver things from the small to the big. Yeah. Is there not a place for that as well as all the kind of empowering?
Well, of course there is. Not everybody. Politics, not everybody is. You'd end up like one of those Chinese views of Tiananmen Square if you got too many people involved. But the idea is that you've got to create a society where you reach out and people can get involved easily, and it's a good thing for them to get involved. Not absolutely everybody, because not everybody will want to be involved.
And we don't want everyone involved.
But at the same time, politics has become so niche in terms of those that know about it and about its value, and it's been so caricatured by the cynicism with which it's portrayed, and some of it deserved, some of it not deserved. Nobody ever makes a positive case for politics or democracy, actually, because they're too busy slagging off the practitioners of it to not, we're quite close to throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
So, Kate, on that, the question sort of started off with kind of delivering on a local level and how you might migrate that. Do you think people are just like over politics, or do you think there is actually this renewed kind of appetite for politics right now? I mean, I have to say, even though I do think politics is in a real crisis, I think people are incredibly energised by politics. That could be in a negative way as well as a positive way as well.
I'm amazed. I mean, like last week I was out in Putney, basically just asking people how they were going to vote in the European elections, were they aware of it? And I was there for about 4 hours, and I was just walking around being really annoying, just asking people what they thought about it. And this was for a piece that went in the Standard last week. I mean, every single person knew about the European elections. Every single person had an opinion on how they were going to vote. They had an opinion on Brexit. I spoke to one person who was out for a jog who spoke to me about indicative votes and how frustrated they'd been at this vote not going that way. And the level of engagement from just literally me walking along the waterfront, and I know Putney's an area where you might meet people, it's a middle-class area, so you might meet people who are pretty engaged in politics anyway, but I was really surprised. And also, I think, my friends talk about it all the time, and this is people that work in completely wide-ranging careers, and I just think it's because of social media mainly that drips through into their everyday lives. And I know Stella's account is followed by loads of mums in Walthamstow who are not particularly political, but they like what she says about the area, and I assume that is repeated by lots of MPs all over the place. So I think people are massively engaged at the moment. But on door knocking, I just say it's really, really important. And I've lived in Islington South and Islington North since moving to London, and nobody from the Labour Party has ever knocked on my door. And now I live in a shared house, so I've got 4 people whose votes
They did, you weren't there at the time.
You are?
They did, you just weren't there at the time. You were off at work.
Well, I mean, we've got 4 people who live in that house, and no one, they would have said if someone had been round. But you've got 4 people there whose votes are up for grabs, and I think, it's a safe Labour area. But when it comes to the European elections, I think you might find that vote will drift.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Gentleman over there, and then we'll try any more. Okay, I'll come to you next. Yeah. Yep. Can we get a mic? I think there's a microphone just coming.
John Browning, thanks. It's been a really good day so far. I've done a lot of work in post-conflict countries, trying to get people re-engaged in politics. So the Balkans, Bosnia, Kosovo, some other places. And a lot of the time we'd work hard to get people coming to local meetings, their own representatives would hold, and just get that whole engagement process going. And what you've talked about here is something like that, except it doesn't really happen. So the question I've got, and maybe thinking a little bit to what Macron's done, not that I like him, I think he's not exactly my favourite at the moment, but the way that he's gone and done this grand debate across France, is there a way that Labour Party could revitalise some of its support at local level by having local meetings which not only get people engaged in discussing politics, inform the party, but also they can inform each other in these discussions about what's going on, what today's politics actually mean. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just going to move on to another question, because I am just conscious of time, and we covered a bit of that, but we can come back to it, sort of wrap up the next question. So, lady over there. Lovely, thanks. That's a background debate.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Ashley Dalton. I'm Labour's candidate for Rochford and Southend East. Stella. Stella was out door knocking with us the weekend before the locals. Thank you for that. And that's what it's linked to. My question is, back in 2015, and Labour suffered a crushing loss, and Ed Miliband resigned. And after the referendum result, Cameron had clearly failed, and he resigned. And last Friday, we had crushing defeats right across the country for both Conservatives and for Labour, and nobody moved anywhere. No one stood down, no one took responsibility. Is there any honour left in our politics?
Kate, as the member of the Fourth Estate with us, just do you want to take that one, and we'll cover John's question off as well. The others.
No. I mean, I guess.
Do you think there's no honourable politicians at all?
Of course, there's honourable politicians, but right now you are in a position where resigning or feeling you should resign, feeling that things, you should just stand up and kind of do the right thing. I just feel like that's completely dissolved. And I guess, look, I'm just thinking about Gavin Williamson, really.
For you.
He leaked and leaked and leaked, and then he got sacked. And the way that he has handled that sacking and his kind of posts on social media have not really, in my opinion, shown someone who's kind of in tune with how to be humble. And I think that that's the same across the board, really. What does it take to be sacked? Boris...
Ask Chris Grayling.
Yeah, exactly. What else can I add? You all know it. There's probably not much else I can add. I'm just surprised, really, I am, that the state of the government now, that you can be in there and make blunder after blunder and not feel personally responsible that you should stand down, which I guess just shows big character flaws, really, in some of the people that are at the very top.
Yeah. Stella mentioned Chris Grayling, and things actually did get so bad. There were rumours that Chris Grayling was going to resign until he realised, he apparently was going to jump ship until he realised he didn't actually have any left. But you are right. It is an extraordinary situation that the weird thing is actual resignations from the government, I think, have never, ever been higher. No one even bats an eyelid at people resigning anymore, but people don't do it for the right reasons. Angela?
Well, I think in this Parliament there have been more resignations from the Cabinet, the government and the shadow government than in any Parliament ever. So I suppose you have to decide whether that was done or those were undertaken for honourable reasons or not. But I think the point that you might have been getting at is that a lot of the unprecedented circumstances we're in, and the way that people aren't behaving in the way they would have behaved with sort of resigning, etc., is about our unwritten constitution and the fact that the things that used to be done, if you, for example, if 85% of your parliamentary party decided that they didn't have confidence in you, you might have sort of resigned. If the vast majority of your cabinet decided, and the 1922 committee decided that you're an absolute total disaster and you need to go, you might have had the honour to resign. That might be what you're getting at. But there are no written rules. These unwritten parts of internal party structures used to be part of our constitution that everybody understood and did. And we are in unprecedented times, and people have stopped doing what they would have done in the past. And that is why, personally, I think we need to move to major constitutional reform and a written constitution, because a lot of these unwritten things that used to keep everybody in check now are not recognised. And so we have to put them into our constitutional structures. And maybe then we won't have a Prime Minister that routinely ignores votes in Parliament, an opposition that won't even vote in opposition days, a chief whip that created a parliamentary session that's twice as long as any's ever been, and only gave us the number of opposition days that we'd have for 1 year, even though we'd been sat for 2 years. I could go on. But the constitutional rolling over Parliament has been extraordinary, and people oughtn't to be allowed to get away with it.
Stella, do you want to touch on that, but also picking up on John's point about
Macron?
Macron and the idea of a grand sort of debate.
I agree with everything that Angela has said. It's an extraordinary environment when basically Amber Rudd is the only decent person left who actually resigned because she'd done to take responsibility, and that seems so long ago. And now we've got Alistair Burt asking if he can come back, having resigned. But I just warn you all, one of the principles I live by in life is it can always get worse. So, don't think we aren't staring down the barrel of Prime Minister Boris Johnson at this rate, or even Prime Minister Dominic Raab. And we haven't even gone to the wives of Westminster. I mean, it's just, things could get worse. Although I was very pleased to see that you won in Kersal Ward, because I did check so I could look you guys in the eye, having come to help. John's point about Macron, be very aware of the Macron model. Macron is absolutely not what you want to do, because Macron is bringing people in fear to 4-hour meetings at which he talks for 3 hours of them. Now, I know we've been to some bad GCs, people, but this is not. But what you can do, absolutely, is involve the public. And I'm going to shamelessly plug again why you should all move to Walthamstow. For example, on all the EU votes, I've held public deliberation meetings with people about the choices in front of me as an MP and given it over to them about what they think the priorities should be. And we've had about 100, 150 people turn up at these meetings at a time. This weekend, yeah, absolutely difficult to get people out on the doorstep to campaign for Labour because they feel a sense of uncertainty about what Labour stands for. But we also recognised we had 234 EU citizens in Walthamstow who had registered to vote in the European elections. So we spent last weekend getting EU citizens to register to vote. Mass community activism. By Wednesday of last week, I was told we got 2,600 of them registered. You can do it online as well. I've got 400 local residents who are all part of a walking group with me, competing on how many steps we can do every single day, because we've got a massive problem with diabetes in our local community, and healthcare is the thing to do. There are 101 ways to involve people. I go back to the point I made earlier. The left is really bad at democracy. Actually, we really don't like the idea of doing things in a different way, of giving over genuine control and participation to people. Macron isn't doing that, but there are many models around the world, whether it is the citizens' assemblies in Ireland that didn't just do abortion and same-sex marriage, but also climate change and the ageing population, whether it is participatory budgets, whether it is having fewer meetings with ourselves and more meetings where we say to people as politicians, okay, you tell me what you think are the choices in front of us and I will go with what you want to do. That's what changes things. That's what I would rather give my time to, because at this point when we've got to convince people that change is possible at all, that's the bigger difference. Because we got those people out this weekend helping to register EU citizens, we've now got people willing to go out and knock on doors on the principle that actually you've got to get the turnout up in London to make sure that Farage doesn't win 1, let alone 2 seats in our capital city. Because I don't know about you, but I don't want to wake up on May the 24th and see the UK delegation for the European Parliament led by people like Tommy Robinson, and that's the choice that we face. But you cannot have that debate with people at a distance or through the kind of Macron model where it's just, okay, you've worn a yellow vest, you've thrown things, I'm going to talk to you about how great the world is. You've got to genuinely involve people, and that means being willing to give up control. And if we're honest, most politicians and most people in political parties find that a really frightening concept. If we can get over our fears, we can change the world.
Brilliant. Rosina, do you think that, a sort of a grand debate type thing, do you think there should be more of that in terms of a local level?
Absolutely. I'm a great believer in deliberative events, and citizens' juries used to do them a long time ago, and they worked, and they were based on different themes, and you'd get people in, 100, 150, 200 people in, you'd workshop, you'd get experts in, you'd get their opinions, people would be able to challenge them, ask them questions. Fundamentally, people are able to make decisions based on being informed, knowing the facts, knowing the details. And that's been lacking for, since 2010. When when the coalition government came in and they decided actually it's all about let's get rid of evidence-based policy making and let's just do just everything on knee-jerk or what we think the Daily Mail reader wants us to do. So absolutely, people need to be informed, and you do that by going out, reaching out to people, getting them into events, getting their views and opinions, and also informing them. And that's how people get the confidence to be able to engage properly. If they don't understand or if they don't know about something, they're not going to want to have a conversation about it, because all you'll be doing is exposing their ignorance. So make it easy for people to find out about stuff.
Brilliant. Excellent. Right, next, I think I'll do some questions. I'll take JP there and then gentleman over there. I'm just conscious of time, and want to try and get through as many questions as possible, so I'll take you in batches of 2, and then I'll just direct to the panel.
Hi, John Paul from Battersea constituency. Where are the voters geographically and demographically that we will need to find to get a working majority Labour government in the next 5 to 10 years?
Okay, thank you very much.
Great question.
Working majority, and gentleman down here.
Seamus from Watford. We've heard a lot about evidence-based politics, and when I hear evidence and data, I think of what I call science fiction socialism. So like a world in which Minority Report is a reality, where we can use data to do all these really cool things and predict people's health, people's potential misdeeds. And we haven't actually talked about that as a movement, about what we can actually do to empower people to use their data for their best health. You talked about diabetes and the walking challenges and things like that. I have type 2 diabetes, partly because during the 2015 general election I drank 15 energy drinks in one day to get out 1,000 leaflets. We have a big task ahead of us, and I think that's kind of the thing that a lot of people want to hear from our politicians is, right, these are the issues, where are we going to take them? Because, you know...
So your question is specifically about data?
About data, where we can go with it. Sorry,
right, great. Thanks, Seamus. Okay. Right. I'm going to start with you, Angela. I'm just conscious of time, so just, if you like, just sort of stick to sort of... Where are these new voters going to come from to get us a working majority?
Well, the Labour Party never creates a successful coalition to form a government if it doesn't keep its working class roots and base together with what are known as the ABCs in polling language. So we have to have a coalition of people who, if you want, middle class people who are doing well, but want to have a better society, as well as our working class stalwarts. I mean, that's how to put it. I don't know whether the Labour Party produces polling data or analytics anymore. I certainly haven't been privy to what kind of planning might be being done about how we win a majority at the next election, but I would be considerably comforted if I thought someone somewhere in Labour Party HQ was doing it.
I'm sure they are, but do you worry?
But it's not being shared with the VLP.
That's another thing. But I mean, I think they probably are. But do you share some of the concerns that we may lose seats in the next general election, leave seats because of Brexit? Do you have any sympathy for that argument?
I think that is a gross caricature of what might be happening in some of areas that voted leave. I think that if you... I
mean, that's just from Labour colleagues.
I think that if you look at what actually happened, it's a bit like Trump. 70% of the people who voted leave were Tory voters. So the vast majority of the people who voted leave were Tory voters. And they voted leave because they wanted a nostalgic, backward-looking project. And the people who led leave in the Tory party want Thatcherism Mark II. And they want the power to do it.
But there were quite a lot of Labour people that did vote leave as well.
But Labour voters, Labour members are overwhelmingly leave. Labour voters are also overwhelmingly leave. Remain.
Yeah.
There's just sorry, I'm getting them all mixed up now. It's just Groundhog Day. The Labour voters overwhelmingly remain. Labour members are overwhelmingly remain. But there are people that we need to reach out to. Just because you come from a Labour area that voted leave, it doesn't mean all Labour voters voted leave.
No.
And that's the thing to remember.
Right.
So I think we need to have the courage of our convictions. There is no way that if we leave the European Union, it will actually assist Labour people to have a better life. That is in our hands as a national government.
Yeah. No. So, Stella, I just very quickly on the data point, because you are very good on all of
Just
all
say
of this
nerd.
stuff.
Just say a nerd.
You are the nerd.
I
As
am
well
a
as
nerd.
being an expert on double denim, you are very good at
I like
nerdy
my
stuff.
technology.
Do you think, I mean, I think Seamus raises a really good point. It feels like we're a bit sort of prehistoric in terms of what we do with all this tech stuff and data and things like that.
Well, Labour at its best has always not only embraced technology but democratised it. The white heat of technology of the 1960s, of recognising that actually big changes were coming that could either exacerbate inequality or could end them. Yeah, for a while now we've sounded like we're fearful of change. We're sounding like the idea that the new jobs that might come from that, the fact that most people moving into technology jobs are self-employed, that technology has changed. You look at all the new jobs that are being created, technology is driving some, not all of that, but it is driving a lot of that. And rather than being frightened of it, we should be ahead of it and making sure that it becomes a force for equality rather than inequality. There are lots and lots of different ways also that we need to think about. Your data is probably more powerful and therefore more of a currency for change than people realise. I mean, there's just huge arguments to come about who owns your data. I always find it slightly frustrating when people are obsessed with public ownership of data and you think, well, hang on a minute, who here has an Oyster card or who here has an Oyster account? The amount of information that TfL own on you about where you walk and what they're doing with that, that's not even been discussed at all. There are some really interesting projects in other countries, like in Switzerland, where the public own their medical data and therefore they have been able to make decisions about where that data is sold and where the benefits of the research that come from that go back to and who benefits and how that's gone into their healthcare system. We are probably 20 years behind most of our competitors in understanding both the challenges. Quick plug, if you ever want to really depress yourself about how far we've got to go on equality, go and read Caroline Criado Perez's book about how the world is constructed for men and how data in particular and how data is collected and used is incredibly misogynistic in its outcomes and what that means, but also in understanding where we could use that as a driving force for equality. It also fits just on your point about data, because your question, Sarah, is basically what makes a
just
seat
very
winnable.
quickly,
It's
Sarah,
what
'cause
makes a
I'm
seat
conscious
winnable,
of,
isn't it? And actually, again, one of the reasons I think doorstepping and the way we campaign hasn't changed in 25 years, by God it has to change, because you all need to understand how strongly people feel about Brexit versus how strongly they feel about Labour to be able to cross-compare, and yet we don't have that way of working as a political movement. You're not being told to ask those questions to get that gradient about who, for whom, how they vote in the European election will be the point at which they break with the Labour movement forever, who will come back to Labour, what are the other things that really move them. We've always asked people how they're going to vote, not why they're going to vote, and that leaves us very, very vulnerable. And if you don't believe me, go and talk to those people who were brilliant Scottish candidates in 2015 who worked their asses off to try and hold those seats and were blown away because we weren't able to give them the why of people voting, not just the how.
Yeah. Although I would say, being Scottish myself, it was also, to be absolutely honest, decades of criminal neglect from some of our sort of Scottish politicians, quite frankly.
But we also
as well.
had people like Gemma Doyle worked her arse off to try and hold her seat, and we owe it to those people, and we still haven't learned those lessons 4 years on about the valiance of issues, basically.
No, absolutely, but also there was, in terms of particularly some of the people that have been around for a long time, and I say this as a Scot, we had been very much taken for granted. And also there's a big lesson, never take your base for granted in politics, because sometimes they don't come home. Now, Rosina, I just want to pick up on Seamus. It's so weird having Seamus at a Progress rally, but I'm really, it's great, it's good, it's the new... Data, do you think we could do more with like data in local government?
There, in public health, we're also already using fingertips data. So that's data that, clinical data from, not clinical data, sorry, residential data about the demographics in the area. So we have, I think we can get down to ward level data on it from PHE. But I don't know, while there's a part of me that thinks that actually using personal data would be a wonderful way to target resources, so to be able to know where diabetes services are going to be most needed, or HIV services are going to be most needed. That part, yes, absolutely, I can see, but also there's a part of me that feels that it's going to be a hard sell as well. So I think the benefits will need to have a really good communications exercise to the general public, who will still need to be convinced about it, because I come across people who are scared of the idea of big data, of people knowing too much about them, not wanting to go on Facebook, not wanting to use Twitter because they don't want the government to know what they're up to. So I think while a lot of us are comfortable with it, I think that we've still got some way to go.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, Kate, finally to you. What are Labour's chance? Where do you think, I mean, we don't know when the next, first of all, when do you think the next general election will be, and how do you think things will shake down? Do you think it will be possible for actually any of the big two parties to get a majority?
I think the next general election will be 2022. I don't think it will be before then. I think it's going to be a long, tedious time for everyone. And can either party get a majority? I think possibly not. I think for Labour, I think Scotland is massive, and I think that was a very good point, and it was something that I jotted down earlier on. I mean, it makes sense to me that without Scotland and without getting those seats back, it's going to be a real struggle for Labour. The other thing that confuses me quite a lot is how much the Labour leadership talk about this Northern Leave voter, and how much you have to essentially pander to them and make sure that they're front and centre of policy making. And I'm from the north of England, and I'm from an area that voted Leave, and I just think it's so much more complicated than that. And I think it's very frustrating that the Labour leadership constantly use that in a way that they fudge their discussions around Brexit. And I think that I'd like to see more data for sure, and I'd like to see more analysis, and I'd like to see more that if you're going to use that as your central claim as to why you've taken this way forwards on Brexit policy, then I'd really like to know who those Northern Brexit backing people are, because they certainly don't come out much on the TV, and they certainly don't come out much in anything that Labour does when they go up north to, let's say, like have a campaign day or launch something, or I just think if those are the people you're talking to, then I want to see them and bring them along to what you're doing.
Okay, now, as the chair's prerogative, we're actually just sort of out of time, but I just have a question that, Kate, if you don't mind, I'm not going to ask you for this because you're not going to help write our next manifesto, although you will be. I want to know from the three elected representatives, what are the top three policy things you want to see Labour championing in our next manifesto? Let's bank Brexit in the sense that let's live in a utopian world where we've either revoked Article 50 or we're at least getting a sort of second referendum. But what are the three policy things that you really, really think the Labour Party has got to champion? And Angela, I'm going to start with you.
Housing has got to be the first one. I think economic opportunity and ensuring that that is spread further than it is now. And I mean, I would always say that what goes with that is ensuring equality of access to those opportunities. And do you have are there any like more specific things in terms of all that stuff, or are they just the broad? You mean you want the retail policies? No, not retail, but a kind of because I think just to get a little bit more specificity. Well, I think if for example, one of the justifiable criticisms of our last manifesto, while it was popular, it wasn't actually that when it came to redistribution, it wasn't that. No, it was the least redistributive manifesto I think we've ever fought on. But I don't necessarily think we need to have Manifesto 101 with the A to Z of policy, everything from what Labour will do for aardvarks to zoos.
Stella.
Just three.
Just three. I just want three ideas.
I'm going to.
And they don't have to be fully costed or anything like that. They're just ideas.
Oh, they do. So I would put a windfall tax on the PFI companies, because there are still 850 of them. £1 in every £4 that you put into the NHS right now is just going straight out to PFI companies. I would use that to fund health, social care and housing budgets, because actually if you want to tackle long-term inequalities, the over 50s who are all living with lifestyles, you've got to put people's budgets together so that they can make choices. On the other end of the scale, I would close the corporation tax cuts they've had and invest that in restoring child trust funds, so that we could give every 18-year-old a lump sum, whether they were going to go to university, whether they were going to get on the housing ladder, when they were going to do training, because right now it's the bank of mum and dad that's the biggest inequality in our society. I would also put a cap on all forms of credit, because if you think Wonga was the last baddie, you haven't met Amigo loans or Aqua credit cards, and there's a massive personal debt bubble rising in our country, and it's because people are basically being missold credit. People need money, but we should put a cap on the cost of all forms of credit. And I'm going to say a fourth, which is, let's just make sure we give equal human rights to all women in the UK, and make sure that we give women in Northern Ireland the right to vote.
And Rosina, what would be in your sort of manifesto?
Yes, I've got housing at the top. Sorry. Housing comes top. More employment and training opportunities for young people currently not in employment and training. And I'd say more investment in public health. I know people talk about the NHS, but public health is really important, because that's about prevention, and specifically around mental health as well, because that is the root of a lot of the issues that we face in society. If we can invest in that, then hopefully we'll solve a lot of the other issues that we deal with.
Brilliant. And Kate, would you vote for all of those things?
Yeah, like him. All good.
Yeah, all good. Excellent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please, that's the end of our session. Please give a really warm round of applause for all our fantastic panellists. And thank you for all your brilliant, thoughtful, clever questions. And if you just stay in your seat for like 2 minutes, Stephanie is just going to wrap up the day's event. So warm round of applause for Stephanie.
I will be very, very brief, because I currently stand in between this and gin, and mostly gin for me. So I just wanted to say a huge, huge thank you to every single one of you that's come here today. Doing this stuff isn't easy. We've all said, and it's been said a lot of times over the last day, that it is hard times. And to pretend that everything is going to snap and change overnight and instantly be perfect would be ridiculous. But what we've also spent the last couple of months really doing is really looking as an organisation about what we need to do to really, really tackle the challenges that we are facing. How do we need to be honest with ourselves that we have to change, and what are the things that we need to do going forwards to make a difference? So yes, it looks different, but it is substantially more than that. One of the things that we did when we launched Conference this morning was play a very quick video. And it is a brilliant video, I think, that was made by Joe, who is at the back of the room, not some fancy agency, just one of those really talented people that we have. If you have not taken your phone out yet and you have not retweeted it, we have literally just done it again with the link to join. And we've already had, I've literally seen on my phone come through today, people joining us about what we want to do and the things we want to change. It can get better, but it gets better when we all work together and we pull through. And I also just want to say one of the things is a huge, huge thank you to the staff that we have here at Progress that get all this done. They are an amazing team, and there's nothing more that we could do. They go above and beyond every single day. And one of it's actually Joe's last day. So we did a thing in the office last night where I did a thing where I was like, thank you. We're really happy that you were here. You've done amazing things, and I promised him I wouldn't do it publicly, and he now hates me because he's hiding at the back of the room. But Joe is someone who joined us last year, and, you know, our website was pretty dire. We weren't really doing things that we needed to do in terms of new communications and how we talk to people in a social media world. And also when we were really starting to ramp up the fight on Brexit and changing the party's position. Joe is someone who's led on Labour Say organising. You'll get his emails, they're great. But he's the kind of person who has transformed Progress from an organisation that has the ability that within 2 hours of it going out last week in terms of rumours that Jeremy was going to back a deal and not necessarily force through a confirmatory vote on the back of it, he literally got over 3,000 people to email him within 2 hours to make sure we stopped doing that. Now, that is an impressive feat for what we're doing. And it is just the start of where we go. So thank you to absolutely everybody from the team. Thank you to every single one of you that helps us do the things that we do, and we're all in this together. And as I say, if you've not shared that yet, please do in terms of the video. If you've not got a friend to join yet, please do. And thank you for your support.